The Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders are not just cheerleaders. Every Cowboys game, this team of thin, beautiful women dance their way to the middle of a football field while AC/DC's Thunderstruck blasts through stadium speakers. And while you are mesmerized by the perfect synchronicity of their movements, while you get lost in the sea of bottled blondes bobbing up and down, consciously or not, the importance of good old-fashioned American values are impressed upon your brain. Not just American, Texan. Because these are effortlessly beautiful, squeaky clean, hardworking Christian girls tailor-made for male pleasure. Because the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders are not just cheerleaders, they're America's sweethearts.
There are two religions in the state of Texas. There is Christianity and football.
These are the Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders. Fans sometimes spend as much time watching them as they do watching the Cowboys.
Did you ever see the Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders?
Who hasn't? They're everywhere.
And there's no question they were selling the sex appeal of these young women, and that at the same time, they were like the girl next door.
Ooh, I want to play with the Dallas Cowboys?
Oh, no. I want to play with the Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders.
We became million-dollar showgirls who made $15 a game.
Sorry, super quick, I made a Patreon if you're interested in bonus or BTS content. Not that kind of BTS, but I just uploaded a little media roundup of some books, films, podcasts, etc. I've been loving lately. So if you're interested in helping to support the channel and a little bit of bonus content, check out the link in the description. Hello everyone, my name is Ellen and welcome back to Illiteracy. A couple weeks ago, a documentary series named America's Sweethearts, Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders dropped on Netflix. And the Netflix algorithm, knowing how much I loved the series Cheer, plastered it on my homepage in a big old banner every time I open the app.
So I've managed to find a woman up watching television. Just going to use hypnosis on her. See me.
And eventually, despite having no interest in American football whatsoever, I watched it. But this was no Cheer. That series focused on the immense physical and mental tolls and the injury risks that are involved in competitive cheerleading. America's Sweethearts, on the other hand, turned its eye from the sport of cheer to the cheerleaders who dance on the sidelines at NFL games. The women that you imagine when you hear the word cheerleader. The women whose bodies are on full display and are prone to frequent critiques. The women who clock hundreds of hours on America's biggest stage, yet get a fraction of the pay or attention compared to the people with whom they share that stage. America's Sweethearts mainly revolves around a group of hopefuls trying out for the 2023 Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders, or DCC. It is almost a continuation of the CMT reality show Making the Team that ran from 2006 to 2022. America's Sweethearts briefly dips into the group's backstory and even more briefly glances at systemic issues faced by cheerleaders in the NFL. But the purpose of the documentary is really to showcase the determination and the drive behind the women involved in the DCC. The DCC are probably the most famous cheerleaders in the world and are like a quasi-royal family in Texas. They are a group whose composition may change every year, but whose appearance doesn't really reflect this. But the women are less seen as athletes, but more commodities, brand representatives of the Dallas Cowboys, as well as being examples of like the perfect all-American woman. The documentary pulls back the veneer of heavy makeup, tumbling curls, and bedazzled two-pieces to look at the women behind the DCC. And it shows the sheer amount of effort that goes into making something look effortless. The documentary, and by extension, the Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders, struck me as a remarkable lens or a gateway to discuss wider ideas of US patriotism, of beauty standards, and gender relations. As America's Sweethearts, they act as a microcosm for how people treat and think about women, especially in the US. And you don't need to have seen the documentary to watch this video, but if you are interested in watching it, there will probably be a few spoilers. I'm far from being the first person to use the DCC as a way to talk about wider cultural issues, so I'll be referencing the works of many talented journalists and writers throughout this video, but A special shout out to Sarah Hepola, whose podcast American Girls charts the inception and the evolution of the Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders, and it was really instrumental in writing and researching this video. We have a lot to talk about. We always do on this channel, because every time I find a topic that's interesting, it ends up like ballooning out into 12 different aspects of culture and history. Cheerleaders weren't always beautiful women dancing on the sidelines. Prior to the Second World War, cheer teams were comprised of men, and it wasn't until the 1970s that they became a prominent feature of football games as we know it now. And this shift has its roots in none other than Dallas, Texas. The Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders were instrumental in shaping cheerleaders as we know them today. From the year 1967, the Dallas Cowboys had a co-ed high school cheer team, but the major shift happened in 1972 when the director of the DCC, Dee Brock, was like, I think we can make these gals a little sexier, give the crowd a little more eye candy. So she did away with the high schoolers and assembled a team of 7 attractive women over 18. No certified lover boys here.
Beat your ass and hide the Bible if God watch.
She also hired a choreographer named Texie Waterman and split her $600 wage with her because the director of the Dallas Cowboys, Tex Stram, didn't want to pay for a choreographer. Right. But of course, the rebrand wouldn't be complete without the now iconic DCC uniform that has since landed a spot in the Smithsonian. The uniform was designed by Paula Van Wagner, who earned a grand total of $0 for her work, which fits with the DCC track record. But little did anyone know in 1972 that this group of women would go on to spawn not only countless copycat groups for other NFL teams, but also books, posters, calendars, Barbies, porn films, documentaries, reality TV shows, articles, and lawsuits. As you can probably guess, the DCC absolutely exploded in popularity and fundamentally altered the image of the cheerleader. What's interesting about this history is the amount of women involved in shaping and spearheading this move from co-ed high school cheer squads to these teams of beautiful, scantily clad women. Dee Brock, Texie Waterman, Paula Van Wagner, Suzanne Mitchell, Kelly Finglas, Judy Trammell. A lot of feminists point to cheerleaders as the epitome of women entertaining the male gaze, which is completely valid. But I also think the DCC is an interesting case study in how women, specifically white women, uphold patriarchy and create these self-regulating systems, because the DCC is a story about women, but it's also a story about control. When you think of cheerleaders, what do you think of? For me, the first things that spring to mind are all the stereotypes that we associate with cheerleaders. Being an airhead, being catty, thin, beautiful, white, blonde, popular, vapid, mean girls that we see all over TV and film. And this is mainly true when media doesn't revolve around cheerleaders, because then the characters have to be likable in order for us to root for them. So the writers have to actually put in a smidgen of effort into making the character. And this cultural devaluation of the figure of the cheerleader may seem inconsequential, but it actually reflects real world dynamics and also reinforces the literal financial devaluation of cheerleaders.
Great job, ladies. Now here's your $50 each, which should just about cover your parking.
Because as many people, including me, found out from the America's Sweethearts documentary, most professional cheerleaders in the NFL are barely making minimum wage.
There's a lot of cynicism around pay for NFL cheerleaders, but the facts are is that they actually don't come here for the money. They come here for something that's actually bigger than that to them.
It kind of reminded me of The Devil Wears Prada, where its philosophy is like, oh, you're lucky to work here because a million other girls would kill to have this job.
I can get another girl to take your job in 5 minutes. One who really wants it.
So you're manipulated into feeling guilty and ungrateful for complaining or wanting better working conditions. It also reminded me of a quote from Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth, which was published in 1990. Western economies are absolutely dependent now on the continued underpayment of women. An ideology that has made women feel worth less was urgently needed to counteract the way feminism has made us feel worth more. The Dallas Cowboys organization is, according to Sports Illustrated, budget worth $9.2 billion and had a 22 revenue of $1.05 billion. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, has a net worth of $14 billion, as we all know. When someone's a billionaire, there's probably a lot of exploitation somewhere down the line. There are a lot of different numbers online about the DCC wages, but a 2022 NBC Sports Boston report states that DCC earn $15 to $20 an hour, $500 a game, and an average of $75,000 a year. But these numbers are very generous estimates based on what we know from lawsuits. Erica Wilkins, who was a DCC from 2014 to 2017, sued the Cowboys in 2018, alleging that she was only paid $4,700, while the mascot Rowdy earned $65,000 that same year. Keep in mind, the DCC are paid much more than any other NFL team. That same NBC Sports Boston report states that on average, NFL cheerleaders earn about $150 per game or $22.5 a year. Other average salaries in the NFL include water boys, who make $53 a year, and mascots, who make $25 a year. One recent DCC veteran, Kat, talked about her wages in the America's Sweethearts documentary.
I'm making like a Chick-fil-A worker that works full-time.
She also followed this up with a TikTok kind of diving more into the wage breakdown.
We get paid for games. We get a flat fee. And then with the flat fee for the games, we get paid an hourly rate. So flat fee plus hourly. I mean, all in all, it's like a full-time commitment, part-time pay. So it's a good part-time job, but we do a lot of work.
But the wages seem to be deliberately vague. In an interview with Sam Reed for Glamour, the director of America's Sweethearts, Greg Whiteley, said that he never got a clear answer. Specifically, this is how much they make. And I think that's because it varies depending on how senior you are in the group. You may even get paid more if you're a group leader, though that was never clear to me. Most of the cheerleaders featured in the documentary, unless they happen to be from wealthy backgrounds, work full-time jobs as well as working for the DCC. Whatever the actual wage of the cheerleaders is, it's clear that the cheerleaders earn a fraction of that of the NFL players. The average NFL player earns $2 million a season, but many contracts are worth much more. And it's easy and tempting initially to dismiss the cheerleaders as doing nothing more than just like shaking pom-poms and looking pretty. But something the Netflix documentary highlights is the amount of labor and money that goes into cheerleading. The rehearsal hours, the community appearances, the photo shoots, the games. Like footballers, these women are athletes. But unlike footballers, there is an immense pressure on their body beyond their physical skills. They're required to have the perfect figure, perfect hair, perfect makeup and nails, all of which takes time, energy, and a lot of money to upkeep. The majority of hair, nail, and tan appointments, gym memberships, skincare, makeup, and hair products are bought with money out of the cheerleaders' own pockets. And this can add up to thousands of dollars a year. And that's not even counting the time, the money, and the energy that has gone into dance lessons and dance costumes throughout the years. I don't think we talk enough about how a crucial part of socialization for women is learning to do hair and makeup and then having to spend like an hour or hours every day doing your hair and makeup to look like quote unquote presentable or professional. It's kind of assumed that femme presenting people will just learn these skills along the way, and then the like money, the time that goes into looking feminine, looking attractive to the male gaze, it's not acknowledged ever, really. We've seen a lot of discourse of like the period tax and how much money we have to pay for menstrual products. And I know like makeup, hair, skin products aren't a necessity, but they kind of are in some professions and in some social circles in order to be taken seriously or in order to appear like professional. That's a whole topic for a different video, but we see this kind of process and this socialization very blatantly in the documentary. One of the core rules of the DCC is that you must show up to rehearsal in full hair and makeup. It's one of these many like strict, old-fashioned rules that the DCC lay out.
There were rules from the beginning.
How do you look in a uniform? You know, do you have a muffin top?
Full hair and makeup every day.
You get there on time, you need to know your stuff.
No gum, ever.
We could not talk to a Dallas Cowboy football player.
I don't want anybody biting their nails at all.
We weren't allowed to swear. We weren't allowed to wear jeans, blue jeans in public.
Fear had a lot to do with my direction, I think.
The managers, Kelly and Judy and Suzanne Mitchell before them, are constantly making things harder for the women than it has to be. There's no reason that the women need to wear full hair and makeup to rehearsals in the summer heat in Dallas. There's also other ridiculous things like they don't get to keep the uniform that is tailored to their body. They have to fuel themselves properly, but they also have to stay thin, so they must eat regimented meals. And they're all presumably sleep deprived and hungry, at least part of the time. Their muscles are in pain from hours of dancing. It feels like all of these physical hardships are manipulation tactics to keep the women in their place, to prevent critical thinking, because then they don't have the time or the energy to consider that they deserve better. There's this sense that because the older cheerleaders suffered through split jumps, beauty standards, dieting, low pay, so should the new cheerleaders. It's like that boomer mentality of you millennials, you Gen Z, you're so entitled, you want money for your work. That's crazy. I did an unpaid internship and I was fine. I got my house at $25 for $50,000. It's literally so easy. It's not that hard. Stop complaining.
These millennials, X-Gen, whatever they're called, they do look at it as a job, where us old-timers look at it as more of a privilege.
Women are great at holding other women in line. White women, especially, are often sleeper agents of the patriarchy. Women are encouraged to devalue other women. We're always pitted against one another. We know that there's only room for so many at the top, so we're constantly competing with each other for resources that are much more freely afforded to men. And the NFL cheerleaders are an example of this self-regulating group that fosters low self-esteem. And this low self-esteem in turn facilitates rigid beauty standards and wage theft. Because if women don't value themselves, how can they possibly feel empowered to stand up and ask for better? 10 out of the 26 NFL cheer teams have had lawsuits against them regarding employment conditions and wages. But then former cheerleaders from a range of teams come out denouncing the women that champion better pay and saying essentially that they're selfish, that they aren't in it for the right reasons.
This lawsuit that they brought forward was about money, and we all know, being here from the 60s to now, it was never about money.
Me personally, I felt sorry for these girls bringing it forward because they're not getting the bigger picture.
They need to remember, I believe, why they're there. It is a privilege.
The exploitation of the NFL cheerleaders is made possible by the mainstream belittling and dismissal of the sport of cheerleading as a whole. Cheerleading and dancing are both female-dominated sports, but they're often not considered sports.
I love cheerleading. Is it just the lame outfits, or do you like the brainless flitting around too? Okay, for your information, Sam, cheerleading is a highly competitive, highly challenging sport with a long-standing tradition of spirited optimism.
The sports are also feminized visually. Cheerleaders and dancers alike often maintain a hyper-feminine appearance, heavy makeup, short skirts, bedazzled spandex uniforms, styled hair. And while dance styles like ballet, for example, is undoubtedly an art form, the amount of physical strength, endurance, and flexibility required to perform feats like putting all your weight on your toes of one foot and spinning around 8 times, all while making it look effortless. Those skills rival or even, in my opinion, outdo the requirements for a lot of professional sports. It's also interesting that for a lot of these female-dominated sports like dance and cheer, women are expected to plaster smiles on their face and not let the effort show through. While in male-dominated sports, men are allowed to show their strain, they're allowed to break character and have these outbursts, etc., etc. It's just interesting. And then these attitudes about the sport pervade into institutions. The National Collegiate Athletic Association, or the NCAA, which is the organization that regulates college sports, doesn't even recognize cheerleading as a varsity sport. Cheer is governed by a separate organization, the National Cheerleaders Association, and this means that there are significantly less financial benefits and opportunities offered to cheerleaders at a college level. And the NCSA website says, in short, yes, cheer is a sport. However, it isn't sanctioned by the NCAA, meaning there aren't official recruiting regulations in place. That also means there's less funding available for coaches at these programs, so you often won't find full-ride scholarships for college cheerleading. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to get a college cheerleading scholarship. Many colleges provide scholarships worth $500 and $1,000 per year to compensate cheerleaders for their participation on the team. So the culture of financial inequality for cheerleaders versus other athletes start at this college level and then goes all the way up to the professionals.
What a lot of effort there is in being beautiful.
Beauty is an essential aspect of the DCC. Watching the documentary and the reality show before it, sometimes it seems like being beautiful is more important than your dance skills.
Dancing's probably 50% really of the full responsibility of a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader is all those intangibles that really have nothing to do with dance. They're not gonna make it to Dallas if there's an aesthetic reason for them not to be appealing to all of our judges.
On the field, the cheerleaders don't have individual identities. They are a monolith. Most of them look very similar in terms of build, hair color, eye color, skin color. Their beauty is generic, so they're replaceable. And this is emphasized by the fact that no existing cheerleaders are guaranteed a spot the next year. Veterans and new applicants alike must audition for their place on the squad every year, and this creates an air of insecurity that then ensures the utmost behavior and obedience from all cheerleaders. And beauty is one of the tools to control these women. Naomi Wolf put forward a theory in The Beauty Myth that beauty functions as a kind of currency and as a requirement to access resources afforded to men like economic and social power. She writes, beauty had to be defined as a legitimate and necessary qualification for a woman's rise to power. The discriminatory purpose of this had to be masked by fitting it firmly within the American dream. Beauty can be earned by any woman through hard work and enterprise.
In this 1997 study, which interviewed women as to why they wore makeup to work, the respondents felt that women who do not wear makeup do not appear to be 1. Healthy, 2. Heterosexual, or 3. Credible. Makeup is so tied up with patriarchy, capitalism, colorism, ableism, classism, so forth, that even those who genuinely choose to use makeup for self-expression or art may face negative consequences. If a woman or femme person decides to wear makeup in a way that aligns with standards of beauty, she does get the practical good of being recognized as properly feminine or a real woman. She will probably be seen as desirable and a competent employee. However, she gives up the moral good of resisting those exclusionary beauty standards. If she does not wear makeup or wears makeup in ways that are unconventional, she may be insulted or called an improper woman. She is treated as the exception that proves the rule about what women should look like.
And beauty is a central theme of the America's Sweethearts documentary. There are countless shots of the women getting ready, and a lot of interviews are conducted when the women are getting ready in their apartments, in their hotel rooms, and there's also slow motion scenes and like montages of them getting ready in the locker room. A huge chunk of time, both in the Netflix documentary and in the reality show before it, is devoted to makeovers, which makes the whole thing feel like an episode of America's Next Top Model more than like a sports or dancing documentary. But as you all probably know, I am very too well versed probably in ANTM, and where ANTM spends so much time and energy convincing the audience that the models are more than just a pretty face, that they can't just rely on good looks. Because like, how many times do we see girls eliminated for like coasting by as a pretty girl or as like a pageant beauty? The Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders don't try to conceal their obsession with beauty at all. And the level of scrutiny and nitpicking that these women are subjected to is like unbelievable. They are like combed over with a magnifying glass, or the modern day equivalent, which is like Kelly, the director, zooms in on photos of every part of a girl's face and body to like look for flaws.
Vic! Don't put mascara on your bottom lashes like that.
Okay.
You don't have it on now, right?
No.
It looks great.
Okay.
See?
Yes.
The documentary ends with this poetic, slow motion montage of various cheerleaders sitting in front of the camera and taking off their makeup. It seems to suggest that we've seen beneath the mask of the DCC cheerleaders over the course of the series. But the women aren't shedding the mask for good. This isn't an embrace of natural beauty. It's like a reminder of the construction of their beauty and how necessary it is to being in this organization. And the excerpts of criticism that we hear from Kelly and Judy and like other judges are just as often, if not most often, based on someone's appearance as like on their dancing abilities. Sometimes it seems like they invent arbitrary reasons to send someone home because unlike the days of making the team, when they could just call someone bottom heavy and use that as justification for their like elimination, we are now in the time when the woke left is ruining the media and you can't like kick a girl off the team for having thick thighs anymore. Ugh. Take me back. Take me back. One particular elimination that we saw in America's Sweethearts that left me with like a bad taste in my mouth was Anisha, who is a 31-year-old orthodontist who did one of the most like dynamic and engaging solo dances. It was a mix of like Bollywood and hip hop styles. She was sent home. According to Kelly, it was because her like toes weren't pointed enough during the high kicks, but the criticism seemed deliberately like vague, and any discrepancies between Anisha and the other dancers weren't really clear to us. And Helen Peterson wrote about this incident for her Substack called Culture Study. The high kick itself also functions as a neutral cutting mechanism. When Anisha, who's Indian American, gets cut, the coaches tell her that the root of her problem was her kicks. No amount of practice could change the fact that the other women out there had been practicing this style of kick since they were children. The implication, Anisha, whose tryout performance was to a Bollywood song, didn't grow up in the American dance tradition, so she could never cut it as a DCC. This is how organizations like DCC, obsessed with the legacy, stay white as they do, by maintaining a status quo that requires investment and experience in a specific sort of American experience. The DCC, if you couldn't already tell, is overwhelmingly white. There are 2 DCC Barbies, one blonde, one brunette, both white, which not so subtly signals to all the cheerleaders and audiences alike that the DCC ideal is white, that women of color do not fit into the mold that they set out. In the America's Sweethearts documentary, with a couple exceptions, women of color tended to be background characters on the team, but not interviewed like the others. Greg Whiteley responded to criticism for the lack of diversity in a Variety interview. There were a couple of women of color that we were immediately interested in, and they were not interested in us. They had incredible stories, and I'm not going to tell you those stories because I hope I'm going to get another crack at it someday, but they were just not ready to tell them. I do wonder if part of it is that like they were afraid to speak out against the organization in fear of like losing their place or in fear of backlash or starting controversy. I'm not sure. I'm just speculating. We'll never know. There have been black cheerleaders on the squad from the beginning. The DCC actually had an integrated team when Dallas was still segregated, but the women of color are still few and far between.
Dallas Cowboys were probably one of the single most important factors of integration in the city of Dallas. Black people went to black schools and white people went to white schools. Everybody went to Texas Stadium on Sunday.
And Helen Peterson points out how the DCC uniform acts as another like neutral decision maker for who makes the squad. A uniform that was designed in the 1970s and has barely changed since, but it has achieved holy status in and outside the DCC, and it must be respected at all costs. Peterson writes, if your body doesn't look right for the uniform, the problem isn't the uniform, the problem is your body. The DCC uniform was designed for the proportions of a slender, medium-height woman with medium-sized boobs. Lots of different types of people have that body, but it's not a coincidence that it's a body type most common among white women. If you're a black or brown woman with that body type, you can also potentially join the team. After all, from its inception, the DCC coaches have aimed to create a squad that, quote, reflected America. Or, you know, at least the skinny part.
I get so hungry. How can I lose weight? You can lose weight deliciously with the aid of AIDS.
The AIDS diet plan really works.
Thinness and body image is a major theme of DCC. So many cheerleaders, past and present, have talked about the damaging effects of the rigid beauty standards and how it creates and fuels eating disorders.
The self-image never ends. I will always see the fat girl in the mirror.
Prior to cheerleading, I never thought about my body image.
Cheerleaders in the 70s and 80s spoke about how they would wrap their body in saran wrap or wear garbage suits while they exercised and effectively starved themselves to adhere to DCC body standards. They don't talk about this in the new documentary, but they talked about it a lot in Making the Team, so I'm not sure if it's still true, but the cheerleaders, at least at one point, were contractually obliged to maintain the weight that they are at auditions.
The girls make our training camp, they have to sign a contract, and one of the things in that contract is that they must maintain the audition weight, the weight they were selected at by our panel of judges. If not, they're in breach of contract.
All of y'all have gained weight from last year. Until we say you're good to go, you won't be doing appearances in uniform.
And we see that the uniforms are custom tailored to their bodies and also are not comprised of much fabric, so any change in weight will be obvious. And I couldn't help but think, like, what do the cheerleaders do when they're on their period? Because I know, like, I get super bloated on my period, and I probably, like, gain weight because of it. I don't know, but honestly, actually, like, I don't even know why I'm asking the question, because I feel like Kelly and Judy definitely, like, don't give a shit, because they're quick to punish anyone who gains weight, regardless of how much they gain and regardless of the reasoning behind it. On the DCC Making the Team wiki, there is a list of cheerleaders and veterans who were cut or resigned each year, and the amount of cheerleaders who were cut because of their weight is shocking. Victoria, who is featured in the Netflix documentary, is very vocal about her eating disorder and her struggles with body image, and it's implied that they very much stem from the DCC and the criticism that she receives in the DCC.
I think it's harder for girls not to even just not want to starve themselves, because I know when I look in the uniform, I'm always like, oh man, I need to lose at least 3 pounds. We were weighing in like every week, and sometimes it would be like at 11 p.m.
You did have some judges say they wanted you to tone up your tummy.
I didn't really know how to handle that.
She has an arc on the previous reality show, Making the Team, and it shows her weight as like a point of contention with Kelly and Judy.
She is not at her trimmest state.
And I just want to always show them that I am either better than they last saw me or the best.
From the few episodes I've watched of Making the Team, they treat women's bodies in a really gross and dehumanizing way, zooming in on women's midriffs as comments about their weight play over it. And there's a lot of comments about the cheerleaders' weight. The obsession with thinness is still very much present in the America's Sweethearts documentary.
Number 17, Kayla.
There was a little bit more weight in her face.
I noticed that. It's heartbreaking.
But Kelly and Judy have learned to veil their language in what I think is an attempt to like avoid criticism. I know they've done away with weigh-ins, but it's tough to know whether unhealthy weight loss methods are still promoted by the team but like kept out of the public eye. In the documentary, there's these kind of veiled allusions to like fueling yourself.
As long as she's fueling herself. Because there was a time where I think she probably wasn't.
Make sure you have enough fuel and enough energy.
Okay.
And the management theorized at one point that one of the cheerleaders, Maddie, isn't having enough intake, aka food.
I don't think she fuels herself, energy-wise. And
energy,
like eating.
Intake or mental?
No, intake.
Intake.
And they briefly consider cutting Maddie because of this, but she stays on. And we don't see any like duty of care in relation to the women's health, physical or mental. There's no intervention for Maddie. There's no conversation with her. There's no coaching on how to be healthy, at least on screen. It feels like this like empty, false display of concern, because it's clear from the weight and the visual requirements that for a lot of women, there's no healthy way to reach or sustain the desired body.
We're looking for an all-American, sexy girl.
The DCC are expected to adhere to expectations that have long plagued women. They are expected to embody this dichotomy of a sexy vixen when they're performing, but pure, innocent sweethearts at all other times. The DCC expectations dictate the cheerleader's entire public personality. Since their spot is never guaranteed from year to year, they have to ensure that they constantly behave like a DCC, even when they're not working. Their public persona has to be this squeaky clean, all-American girl. They aren't to be shown drinking alcohol. The only relationships that we see are with boyfriends or fiancés. They very much value a purity culture. It's completely heteronormative, like there's not even a whisper of queerness at any point. They're supposed to be sexy, but not sexual. They put on their sex appeal along with their false eyelashes. It's another part of their costume because they're not allowed to actually embody or explore their sexuality. They're performing sexuality for others, men, but not exploring it for themselves. And the only people who are allowed to profit off of their sexuality is the NFL. In this case, the Cowboys. And there's a few interesting tidbits of history that I want to touch on from the DCC. In 1977, the DCC posed for a poster that would go on to outsell the infamous Farrah Fawcett poster. It ended up selling over 1 million copies. The photographer got paid $14,000. The Cowboys made $1.8 million off of it, but the cheerleaders didn't get anything. No compensation for the shoot, no cut of the revenue, nothing. The next year, Playboy was doing an NFL special issue, and a few former DCC posed for a kind of a parody of the original poster, but they were topless. The issue sold 6.5 million copies and was one of the top-selling Playboys of all time. And the former DCC negotiated a split of the revenue for posters sold of it, but they didn't see much money because the Cowboys quickly sued to stop production. They also sued filmmakers who made a porn film called Debbie Does Dallas, which was about a DCC but didn't actually star any.
Get out. What is this? You're on Debbie Does Dallas.
Yes.
Debbie
and
Does
I was there
Dallas.
to work out. So I didn't know this was going to happen.
Oh
so
my
I felt
stars.
almost like
The Dallas Cowboys spent $1 million to sue Playboy and to sue the filmmakers, which is interesting, where they decide where to shell out, where to spend money, that they just had this $1 million to sue for the DCC likeness. They're ready to defend the image of the DCC, but they're not ready to actually pay the women. That culture of control over women's sexuality is still present today. The DCC, along with many other NFL cheerleaders, pose for swimsuit calendars, and they may get a flat rate for the shoot, but they don't get a portion of the sales. A former cheerleader for the New Orleans Saints, Bailey Davis, was fired after she posted a picture to her Instagram of her in lingerie. It's clear that when it comes to who decides when these women get to be sexy and who gets to profit off of it is never the women themselves. It's the people in charge, who are almost always men. The cheerleaders are pedestaled and protected and imprisoned. The cheerleaders know that they are supposed to fulfill the fantasy of every male audience member. Judy Berman writes for Time, "Men may ruin their bodies playing football or be shunned by the NBA because they aren't 7 feet tall. But no one expects them to fulfill every fan's fantasy. As sweet surrogate granddaughters to the nursing home residents we see DCC visit, role models to the little girls who idolize them, eye candy to guys of all demographics, isn't America's Sweethearts, which is also the squad's nickname, just a quaint way of saying America's girlfriend?"
Our job literally is to make other people happy. No matter what we feel like, it is to make others happy.
And this intimacy gives sense to ownership and entitlement. It creates a parasocial relationship that has turned dangerous on several occasions. Both past and present cheerleaders have talked about their experiences with stalkers and with sexual harassment.
I've had letters sent to my personal address of like, I feel like we're best friends. I know where you live.
There was somebody that kept calling the Dallas Cowboys, and they were going to kill me.
They have expressed that they have felt unsafe in their own home because of hostile, obsessive men. At one point, they talk about Suzanne Mitchell's rules, and one of them says,
"Have you ever had bad experiences with men? There is one acceptable answer here. As a cheerleader, no."
The DCC have a policy in place that when they take pictures with men, the men are given a football to prevent them touching them. There's one instance in the America's Sweethearts documentary where we see an instance of sexual assault play out. One cheerleader, Sophie, is groped by a photographer. She immediately goes to security and police and she identifies him. The man is banned from AT&T Stadium, but according to Arlington Police Department, they couldn't find sufficient evidence to prove a sexual assault had taken place. The management of DCC repeatedly state that they strive to make the girls as safe as possible, but one, this instance happened on a field where there's supposedly a stringent security team and it's during a game. Two, even though the perpetrator was immediately identified and it was a crowd full of people, he was never charged.
Just because we put on this uniform doesn't make us like an object. Like I am still a human being who worked hard to wear this uniform. Treat me with respect.
The other girls are extremely supportive of Sophie, and we hear them talk about their frustration over being objectified. And it's really hard watching Sophie, who's 19 years old, she's the youngest member of the squad, sit down and recount what happened to her. Another cheerleader in the documentary, Kelsey, talks about her experience with stalking and harassment.
There was an air tag put on my car, and I didn't know until I got home, so whoever it was could see where I lived. I had to call the police and file a police report, but there's never anything that they can do until somebody hurts me, so.
And she's not alone in this at all. It seems like there are not enough safeguards in place to protect these women, like even on their very own football field. And the Dallas Cowboys are happy to commodify the sexuality of their cheerleaders and make millions off of it, to create desire and intimacy centered around these women, but they ultimately fail in their responsibility to protect them from the dangerous consequences. But the cheerleaders are, for the most part, just supposed to grin and bear it because their purpose is to serve their community. Which leads me to my next section.
Deep in the heart of Texas.
Watching an American football game as a non-American, you get a lot of whiplash with the sheer amount of aggressive U.S. patriotism that's shoved in your face at every turn. Military flyovers, field-sized flags, eagles, the bird, not the football team, but yeah, those two, red, white, and blue, everything. And of course, the national anthem. It's so clear to me that the NFL is the ultimate expression of American patriotism, but I was really struggling to put it into words. So one of my friends, Rebecca, sent a voice message with some very valuable insights that I just want to play some excerpts from for you now.
So I think what makes American patriotism unique compared to other countries is that America isn't that old. So the pride for a lot of Americans doesn't come from history and tradition. These aren't the like patriotic foundational ideals of America. Those ideals are more about invention and progress, and we're this nation of immigrants who came together to make something new, and we can sustain ourselves because we have this huge swath of land and such a huge population. And I think that there is a lot of pride that comes with playing this sport that no one else cares about. Like there's an idea that we internally within our nation can self-generate culture. We don't need any influence from the outside world. Like we're going to play this game that we made as Americans. It's a uniquely American game, and we are such a large and wealthy country that we can just play it against other Americans and it's still going to be the spectacle that, you know, like some other sort of competition would be, because that's kind of our power.
I also asked on Instagram for like your thoughts on this, and thank you to the people who kindly took time out of their day to message and like help give insight. One person, Alexis, said something similar to Rebecca. Quote, I think that a lot of where the patriotism aspect comes in is that Americans consider themselves above all else to be winners. There's an inherent arrogance that America is and has always been the best. But that's not and has never been true. A reply I also found very funny was from Thea, who said, I grew up in small town US. My high school slogan, I kid you not, was faith, family, football. I wanted to do a little bit more on the ground research, get a better sense of the culture of like what football is really like in America. And I had a teeny tiny little sample size of footballers to survey for this video. In fact, and equaled 1. So I gotta take a moment to thank Noah Sampson for kindly FaceTiming me and explaining to me like what football is. Noah has 2 YouTube channels, one where he does commentary on internet culture and politics, and a second channel where he talks about mental health while doing chores and tasks and other little fun things. Noah's amazing, and you should check him out if you don't know him already. His channels will be linked in the description, as per. And Noah is a former footballer, and he gave me some insights into football culture, but I asked him questions like, can you name any cheerleader? Which he could not. Flop. This isn't to roast Noah, by the way. He is an ally to women everywhere. He was just the guinea pig for this little social experiment because, as I said, I had a very tiny Tim survey pool. But he said himself that he could definitely name like countless football players in the NFL, which I think is probably indicative of the majority of NFL audiences and underscores both the homogeneity of and like the lack of recognition for cheerleaders. Noah also mentioned that you don't really see cheerleaders during televised games. Like in between plays, they screen slow-mo replays of the game, which he said could be false. But again, I think the fact that he couldn't remember underscores how little attention is paid to the cheerleaders. And actually, something that I was shocked by when I like YouTubed the DCC Thunderstruck routine is that on the big screen, they showed the cheerleaders, but then they'd also cut to like the slow-mo replays or slow-mo plays from the game or something. And I was just like, these women work so hard. They work tirelessly. They break their bodies for this routine, and they can't even have like 4.5 minutes of uninterrupted screen time. Baffling. There's a clip in the America's Sweethearts documentary where the cheerleader Victoria, whose mom was also a DCC, talked about how her dad and brothers never went to see her cheer. So it feels like there's such a cultural apathy towards cheerleaders, like outside of the world of cheerleaders. Noah also confirmed that, at least in his experience, there was never any pressure put on him or his teammates' bodies beyond like their strength and capabilities. Their body image was never like a point of criticism. I also asked him about the ties to the military, and he told me similar things about like the flags and the jets and the birds and whatever. The flags and the jets and the birds and the bees. Sorry. He told me similar things about like the flags and the jets and etc. But he also brought up how in high school, football and the ROTC, which is like the American Youth Army. That makes it sound like Schmittler Schmooth. You know what I mean? The pre-army training corps for teens. Anyways, that sentence got derailed. But Noah told me that football and the ROTC were very much linked, like mainly through these kind of tests of physical strength and endurance. And this kind of sets up a basis for links between the NFL and the US military that we see popping up time and time again, because we see ties to the military and everything from the aesthetics to the very structure of football. Adam Kilgore writes for the Washington Post, by its nature, football is a militaristic sport. Opponents fight for territory. There are trenches and blitzes and bombs. The NFL's massive popularity across all societal spectra may have made its tie to national identity inevitable. Naturally, the DCC have these same ideas of patriotism and the military. Since the 1970s, the cheerleaders have flown overseas to visit US soldiers stationed abroad on USO tours. And I think that this patriotism informs how cheerleaders are viewed and how they view themselves. They are all American women, and the work that they do reflects these gender roles. They are expected to be self-sacrificing, not demand anything in return for their labor. Their function is supporting men's labor, literally cheering them on from the sidelines. And like a 1950s housewife or a 2020s tradwife, they shoulder the responsibility of looking good for their men. They put their bodies through enormous physical strain, damaging their bodies permanently, especially with the signature move of the jump splits, which rips up cheerleaders' hips.
I've had 12 orthopedic surgeries in the last 6 years, so there's that.
Both my hips are torn. Some girls' backs and necks are pretty messed up. A lot of girls get surgery.
And the cheerleaders are expected to do everything with a smile on their face and a yes ma'am. Off the field, the DCC focus on community work, from nursing home visits to day camps for children. For the DCC, they all fit into this very Southern brand of femininity, whether or not they're from the South. They have no time to think about themselves. They're constantly told that they are living the best days of their life. And whether or not it's true, it's how it ends up being framed in their memories. And as I said, they're expected to be self-sacrificing and ask nothing in return, which is reflected in their wages. And any cheerleaders that speak out or take action towards better wages are punished, excommunicated, and branded ungrateful by other cheerleaders. And I feel like this exploitation is also made possible from the sense of duty, the service to the community that is brought up from the patriotism. This legacy of exploitation in the NFL is by no means unique to the cheerleaders. FD Signifier made a fantastic video called How Black Athletes Are Exploited that I watched in prep for this video, and FD talks about the dehumanization and exploitation of Black men for sports, and at one point makes an apt comparison between when you grow up as a girl and at some point you realize that your body is not your own. It's the subject of the control of your state or your country. It is objectified for male pleasure, and many Black men are encouraged to objectify themselves through sports for financial gain.
In those first few years where a Black boy plays a sport, he's probably just a kid having fun, at most idolizing and imitating the sports stars that he sees on TV. But at some point when somebody notices that a boy has this natural talent, he goes from being a kid playing a game to a prospective commodity. Thus, we might see boys as young as 12 or 13 years old begin to carry the pressure and weight of professional athletics, but without the compensation.
There's also definitely the same sense that these football players who wear helmets and shoulder pads, whose faces are covered, that they are disposable. They'll enter the NFL and destroy their bodies until they can't perform satisfactorily, and then they'll retire, their spot quickly swiped up by a younger, fitter, stronger man. But at least they get paid more than minimum wage. But that's not to say that they aren't financially exploited.
Since the 70s and the 80s, the NCAA has really one job, which is to make as much money as it can for itself and these colleges. And all of that is possible because the college players who make up this billion-dollar industry never seen any direct profit off of even their own names and likenesses until recently. And understand the new name and likenesses laws. For the longest time, you could, as a college football player, have your name on the back of your jersey, have your school sell your jersey with your name on it, and then not have to pay you a dime for it. But all the money is coming from Black bodies that put on cleats and shoot free throws. It is what it is.
The NCAA finally implemented laws around this, but it's the exact same exploitation that uses cheerleaders' bodies to sell posters and swimsuit calendars without compensation. And that example of the college athletes shows that this can be regulated and changed, and that labor issues like this need structural and legal change. But first, we need the cultural change to undo the misogynistic attitudes that devalue cheerleaders and women in general and brand them as ungrateful for demanding fair pay. And hopefully that cultural change can be somewhat furthered by this video. I've covered a lot in this video, so thank you very much for making it to the end. And as it is hopefully clear from the nature of this video and my approach to previous videos on this channel, this is not a criticism of the individual cheerleaders, whether they're on the DCC or a different sports team. This is a critique of the industry and the culture that dehumanizes, objectifies, and exploits these women. A lot of these women become cheerleaders because they want a sisterhood and a community, and also because they love to dance. And there's not a lot of avenues to dance professionally in the world. And so it's important to make sure that the avenues that are available to dancers are fairly compensated. It's easy to demonize the women and criticize them for like objectifying themselves or perpetuating body standards. But like, we need to look at the structures that are in place and the people at the top who are making these decisions, who are almost always men. The owners of the NFL teams are men. The people they employ to manage the women may also be women, but they are men, and they are the ones making all the decisions, especially about the financial side of things. It's important to always look at the bigger picture, because like tearing each other down, fighting amongst ourselves, tearing other women down doesn't benefit anyone except the men at the top who are making all the money off of this. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!